Next, we're going to explore the health equity impacts of one of these weather conditions, extreme heat, as Pete said, and some of the best practices being developed right here in Iowa. So we have a panel of experts here. They're going to share with us their work in academia, in emergency management, in local public health, and in the nonprofit sector. I'll do a quick introduction of each one of our panelists. You can read their full bio in the materials that you have in your folder, and then we'll get started. Dr. Chris Uejio is the Assistant Professor of Geography at Florida State University. He has spent the last 16 years researching how the physical environment influences human health and well-being, and he'll speak to us today about national efforts to combat heat, recent developments in extreme heat, and in the extreme heat and health field, and public policies and extreme heat adaptation. Next, we'll hear from Mr. Travis Beckman, who's the Deputy Director of Johnson County Homeland Security and Emergency Management Agency. His experience ranges from volunteer firefighter to flood response to Ebola preparedness planning. And he'll speak to us today about his county's contingency plan for excessive heat emergencies. Following on that local lens, Mr. Juan Cadenillas is the Public Health Planner for Polk County Health Department. His work includes community-based initiatives and partnerships to manage the needs of Polk County residents during times of extreme heat, as well as data mapping to help us identify areas of vulnerability and plan accordingly. Today, he'll share with us some of his maps and work to reduce disparities in heat-related illness and emergencies. And finally, we have Lana Shope, who's the Executive Director of Iowa Community Action Association. She's been an advocate for children and families for over 20 years, and she'll be speaking with us today about the unique needs of the people she serves and the role of community organizations, with the role they can play in ensuring the needs of all people are met during times of extreme weather. Each of our panelists will speak, will give their presentation in turn, and then we'll take questions at the end collectively. You have cards on your table that you can write your questions down, and Leslie in the back will be collecting those. You can just raise them up and she'll collect them and bring them to me. And then we'll do questions at the end, and we'll direct them to the panelists that we have here. So without further ado, I turn it over to you, Dr. Uejio.
Thank you very much for the invitation. As you can tell, one of these things is not like the other in terms of the geography. But nonetheless, I thought it'd be helpful to provide sort of a cross-national perspective. I actually didn't know sort of the order, but I'll spend just 1 minute talking about extreme heat, and then I'll focus on my 3 core messages. So extreme heat, in terms of the weather hazards or disasters, whether that's hurricanes or tornadoes, is the #1 killer in the United States. And so I just want to put that out there first, since I've omitted some of those slides from this presentation. We know that everyone is at risk, but some communities are more at risk. So those would be young children, obviously if you can't speak or communicate that well, older adults, who may be more likely to have pre-existing health conditions, limited mobility, take other medications that increase your heat sensitivity. People based on their occupation, if they're working outdoors, firefighters, agricultural workers across much of the nation who have limited abilities to cope or adapt to heat. And certainly lower income people who can't afford air conditioning. So that sort of segues me to some of our extreme heat challenges. And I really just have 3 key messages, and I really want to hear from the panel and from your questions as well. So the first key message is really about air conditioning, and really, can we rethink air conditioning? When we see some of the best science going forward, we know that the globe is going to need more air conditioning. And I think from a pure environmental perspective, that might start to raise some anxiety. We know that energy usage is going to go up at least 60% by mid-century globally. We know that adds about $3,000 at least per year in terms of energy costs just to keep cooling down. And we also have to think of the greenhouse gases, right? If we're using energy, we're also perhaps contributing to this further exacerbating climate change. So this is typically maybe what people think of. They think of a lower middle income nation that is starting to adopt more air conditioning. But from an equity perspective, we have to think of both those who are energy impoverished and those who can afford to pay for air conditioning. So this is from AARP, and they've just done a nice little survey to show that essentially our low-income households that are on this heating and energy assistance program. Some of you in Iowa are probably familiar with this program. It's primarily used for your wintertime heating bills, but they could be used for cooling bills as well. But essentially, this population that does receive aid spends about 16% of their income, which is about the same percentage as you'd spend on food. So it's a non-trivial amount. So from a public health perspective, then we have people like the New York City Health Department who are essentially then advocating for a more nuanced view of air conditioning. So they've come out fairly strongly to say that it must become unacceptable for indoor temperatures to be set so low that so some can wear suits while at work, while others are dying in overheated homes. So in terms of air conditioning, I think my take-home message for that is that we need some nuance to that discussion. Just like someone would say in terms of food productivity, we don't want everyone to have enough food. We would want food in moderation. So we want judicious use of our energy. And I certainly have had in-laws before who like to keep their temperatures indoor in the summer at like 68 degrees. Right? So that's not what we're necessarily discussing. But can we expand access while moderating how much we use? So which leads to sort of indoor temperature standards. As I view this as sort of an up-and-coming issue, in terms of extreme heat, there are no indoor temperature standards for workers who are working indoors, nor people who live or work inside of buildings or live inside of their households, so if you're a renter. So that may seem like maybe a non-finding, but if you think about it in terms of a place like Iowa, where you actually do have heating standards in the wintertime, where if you're a renter, your landlord could be derelict if they're not allowing or providing and maintaining their heating equipment to a certain level. It could, in some places, not necessarily here, it could be fined for that. So I'm just providing an example from Florida. These are probably our extreme event that we're most concerned with. This is Hurricane Irma. Long story short, Hurricane Irma knocked out, it caused some damage in the southern part of this portion of the state, and also in the aftermath of the hurricane, knocked out power for about a week for a large part of the state. This is a nursing home, Hollywood Hills, which I guess infamously essentially had nursing home residents die, about 14 of them, due to the heat, not necessarily directly related to the hurricane, but to the loss of power and the loss of air conditioning after the heat. So can we point to these individual cascading effects of disaster? Sure. But why I bring this to our attention now is actually primarily from what Florida did next, right? So Florida, under Governor Scott and the Republican legislature, did something that was fairly interesting and forward-thinking. They set what I would call the nation's very first indoor temperature standard. They don't necessarily frame it that way, but that's how they wrote the law. But they said essentially nursing homes have to be able to keep indoor temperatures at 81 degrees Fahrenheit for a certain area for 96 hours after an extreme event like a hurricane. So in 81 degrees Fahrenheit, right? Not particularly hot. We're not even talking about hot temperatures going forward. These are temperatures you might experience in your summer here in Iowa. Florida being what it is, this isn't actually the same picture. This is a different hurricane. This is Hurricane Michael. I know they all look the same. So they actually had a natural experiment then where, as you would expect, we got hit with a hurricane the subsequent year after the standard was in place. And beneficially, though I haven't been able to, we'd love to evaluate this. We haven't been able to get someone to fund this yet. But we know that this has been a helpful standard, that many nursing homes didn't have to evacuate or move their patients at all, and that actually leads to much better health outcomes, meaning that just moving someone who's critically ill, you risk injuring them further. So this is where one can work across ideologies, across lines to think about increasing our resilience. And then I'm just going to leave us with a sort of broader thought, short terms versus extreme heat, which I think some of our colleagues on the panel will talk about more. And really what we're grappling with in Florida is really what I would call sort of chronic or persistent exposure to heat. So maybe using sort of a vulnerability lens or framework, many of you or many on the panel might talk about these relatively rare heat waves that last a few days. Maybe it happens every other year, something like that. But how we respond to these events are going to be very different than how we'll need to respond going forward. So if we have something that's relatively rare and infrequent, we can set up cooling shelters, we could set up pop-up medical clinics, we could ask people to check in on their neighbors on a short-term basis. But what happens when this is not just a couple days event, but it's really a multi-week period, or in terms of us in Florida, it's really July and August for most of the workday. That actually poses a big challenge. Now we have to move towards actually actively managing heat. And what do we do about that? We are more concerned about outdoor workers then. It leads to different types of heat problems, which this area is still an active area of investigation. But we have to think about actually changing the way that our society operates. Maybe we have to start work earlier and use lighting and more energy to do that, to avoid the heat. Maybe we need federal regulations. There are no outdoor heat federal regulations. There's federal heat guidelines, but none of them are regulations. This is a graphic of illness rates here, and this is a measure of heat exposure, which considers a variety of things, which I won't fully go into. But as we can see here, at relatively moderate heat exposure levels, this is in the Gulf of Mexico after the Deep Horizon oil spill, we see that pretty consistently that your rates of injuries and accidents go up. So although the thresholds for people who are not outdoor workers varies from one city to the next in terms of what's a dangerous level of heat, we know actually across the globe that there are unsafe outdoor low exposures. So if you are actively generating heat by working, cleaning brush, doing outdoor activities, there are some pretty clear, almost universal relationships where we know you're more likely to get injured. So do we have to do things like move our Summer Olympics to the Fall Olympics? Some pretty broad shifts. This is really a concern from this coming up with the Tokyo Olympics. The previous time Tokyo held them, they actually did hold them in the fall, but we were holding them in the summer. So this poses threats to our athletes as well, and obviously in a place like Iowa, as well as Florida, some of our agricultural workers. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Chris, for sharing your research and examples from Florida with us today. We all know that a solid evidence base is important for decision making when it comes to regulations or policies like you suggested. Now, Travis Beckman will share with us how Johnson County has developed and is implementing its emergency plan.
Thank you. So what was kicked off there is a perfect segue into kind of what we do locally. And while I'm up here representing Johnson County, I would like to assure the folks in the room, our Emergency Management Association for the state of Iowa, we're part of that, and we represent the state from this aspect, and essentially letting you all know, public health, professors, universities, others, that we're here to be partners with you on this. Johnson County in particular, we took a proactive approach implementing a contingency response plan in 2012. So originally with this seminar today, the symposium, when our agency was asked to be on the panel here, I was excited about it because it is something near and dear to my heart. And prior to coming to Johnson County, I worked in healthcare, did emergency management for 2 healthcare organizations. And a couple key things that really hit me that I wasn't ready for, even in the healthcare environment. One was in 2013 when, before getting some excessive rains, we experienced a drought. The drought really hit our healthcare organization hard. We were experiencing high heat, water shortages, and we operated a very large dialysis center for our community. And we were within 2 to 3 days of being asked to restrict our water usage for dialysis. Anyone who knows dialysis knows very dependent on water. And we also, unfortunately, waste a lot of water in the process that we discard with dialysis. So that really hit home. And then my second event, in addition to working 6 months of my life with Ebola preparedness, we also worked the Zika outbreak, which didn't come here, but in healthcare, in the public health world, we had to prepare for that. And one of the trends we noticed with that was with the increased heat, things that we normally wouldn't have been worried about 10, 15 years ago, we were starting to worry about. The trend of the heat coming upwards to the Midwest and seeing a migration of mosquito species that were pertinent down in those southern regions of the United States starting to drift northward. So those were things that really opened my eyes, saying, why is this happening? So looking at some of that, I'm very glad that Johnson County, and I started with them in 2017. I came into an organization that had a heat plan in place. So I was very happy to see that. So looking at some of the background information, why we developed this plan, what we did. So collaboratively, working with our public health partners, which we have some Johnson County public health representation in the room, so thank you guys for being here. But working with them and many others in our jurisdictions, we first of all started looking at information from other states, not just Iowa, but as was kind of noted in the opening speech, looking at those trends and what can we expect in the coming years. And what we saw was reality. Heat trends are happening in addition to the flooding trends, the excessive rain events, those type of things. We also, of course, looked at local data. What are we seeing locally in Johnson County, Eastern Iowa, the Midwest? We also had been doing this. Prior to 2012, we have experienced heat, obviously. So there were things we were doing already within Johnson County. And what we did is we incorporated all that. And under emergency management, we work in emergency support functions. So what we did is we said, you know what? We have this plan. Let's formalize it, put it under our ESF structure, and make it an official response for the county. So that's what we did with that plan. So the question comes up, why do you guys waste time with excessive heat plans? I've heard those type of questions. So first of all, like I said, we had plans in place already, or not officially on paper, but things we were doing, working with our partners, setting up those cooling shelters. So it's things we were already doing. But also into developing a formal plan, what all our plans do at the county level, it brought all the key stakeholders together. So those folks from public health, the folks from the University of Iowa, one of the greatest partners we've ever had, Iowa Flood Center, which I know we're talking heat, but when we talk anything weather, they are a tremendous asset. So thank you, Iowa Flood Center. Had us all working off the same script. And it also clearly identified our roles. In the emergency management world, we're all big about defining people's roles during emergencies and crises. So it did that for us. It also laid out the heat phases, the different phases of the heat emergencies, not only for our organizations to know, but the public as we share this plan. Collaboration. We know it takes collaboration and effective messaging to be able to communicate with our citizens. No, not one agency can do it alone. It can't just be emergency management. It can't just be public health. We notice things now in the days of social media where one post might be the same between us and public health. On one day, it might be our agency getting the 100 likes and shares. The next event, same post, it might be Johnson County Public Health getting that. So collaborating, getting that message out, joint information messaging, we do that all the time for these events. We also realized in our collaboration as we did this planning phase, which is common, the importance of NGOs, our non-governmental organizations. So we looked at them and they had a seat at the table. which, as I noted, we bring them to the table quite a bit. They're such an important asset to our communities and across the nation. So we looked at American Red Cross. You know, who better at mass care and sheltering during a big event than Red Cross? So we worked with our local chapter, which for us is out of Cedar Rapids, and they've got a great group up there. Going back to 2012, I worked in Linn County then, and then more recently with Johnson County, the leadership they have up there has been great. And then, of course, we looked locally to the Johnson County Salvation Army based in Iowa City. What we saw with Salvation Army was they were doing this already. Daily, they had their cooling center open by default, bringing folks in that were, you know, less fortunate, fixing hot meals for them, but placing them in a cool place to eat those meals. Extending their hours during the days on heat warnings, heat advisories, those type of things. So we worked with Salvation Army and once again said, hey, can we formalize this? Can we put you as part of our plan so that on those smaller scale events, rather than trying to find the additional resources, staffing, manpower, all those things, to open up an independent shelter, cooling shelter, can we go ahead and utilize the services you're already providing? Tremendous asset for us. So one thing, in Johnson County, we like to tote what we own and talk about the resources. And they're a great resource for Johnson County, but we send these things all over the state. So, you know, we're proud to say we own mobile generators, and we know the downside of that, right? They contribute to other gases and emissions and those type of things. But talking about those long-term care facilities and stuff, if the power goes out, we maintain portable cooling and heating gets trailers, drash tents and trailers to set up mobile cooling centers. We're one of the only agencies in the state that owns and maintains a portable water purification system. We also have a water distribution system that includes this water monster here, which is portable water. And then we also have a 5,000-gallon non-potable water hauler that we own and utilize, and that's actually been deployed out of state in the past. So for us, Johnson County, Iowa Emergency Management Association, we're looking to the future. With all of you to be our partners, we know this plan will need to be updated as the years go on. There'll probably be expansions to this plan, and then of course the revisions, working with our partners, public health, our watershed communities, all those folks, the University of Iowa, to better develop a more comprehensive plan as we see those trends change. So thank you for your time, and I will pass it on. Thank you.
Thank you, Travis. Thanks for bringing the attention to the importance of collaboration and partnership as we deal with any of these problems. While Juan is getting ready, I just want to remind everybody that about the cards you have on your table. Just write down your questions, and Leslie will collect those, and we'll answer those at the end. So now Juan is going to talk to us about how Polk County is taking all of this and working together to address disparities that we see in heat emergencies.
Hello, everybody. Again, my name is Juan Cadenillas. I'm a public health planner with the Polk County Health Department. Something I noticed is that I didn't put a title on my presentation. So if I think a title for this presentation will be the title of a song, actually, from the song from the Beatles, called With a Little Help from My Friends. I hope everybody knows that song. If you don't know that song, go and check it out. Joe Cocker have a very good version too. So what happened, and what I'm going to tell you in the next 10 minutes or less, is what we have done at the health department with our friends. Basically, this won't be as a technical presentation as we have, which are great. At the same time, I will repeat some of the topics that you have here, just for Chris and Travis, about the perspective of Polk County Health Department about how to make our community safe. What you see right here, I will almost say to the right, but to the right, to the left, is a map. I'm going to tell you about how the Polk County Health Department is working on shelter, working in collaboration, and working in education. Our first approach and the response that we started a few years ago has been a response role to extreme heat. We initially start with overnight shelters, which it worked to an extent. It was the concern of the health department that we noticed that most people basically didn't want to leave their home at night to come to a shelter to spend the night during the extreme heat event. It was their first option to be at home or have the capability to go to a place, take a break, take a respite from the heat, and then come back. So in that sense, we established and we get more proactive in identifying what we call, what has been mentioned already, a cooling center. It's basically a place, a location in the community where people can go, residents can go to take a break from the heat. It has been proved just 20 minutes or so of taking a break from the heat could provide a great relief to the human body for the effects that high temperatures could have. Now, our first approach for cooling center was to use public buildings. The reason that they are open to the community, there is not much, it kind of facilitates the logistics about having them available to the community, and so more residents can go. But then we become a little bit more strategic related to that. And we follow actually a model that was is tented, or at least has been promoted by the Minnesota Health Department. It's basically using census data and assessor data, in this case, our friend, to how we can determine what is the greater need for cooling centers. So we put together some data related to poverty, and as you heard before, we have some populations that are more at risk. Children, seniors, 65 over. I don't say that people 65 over are senior, but 65 and over was the data that we have from the census, age 0 to 5. Also working our friends for Polk County Assess, so we were able to identify what areas in Polk County has a high density of homes with no AC. There is an extent, there is a limitations, at least to understanding of, fans could do during the very high temperatures. So we were focused on to see what, housing units in Polk County don't have a central air conditioner, which will serve to give a relief from the heat. And what you see in this map is that, basically, the darker you see, the darker the area, the greater number of housing units with no AC. What we use here is a geographical, representation mixed with census tract, basically a census definition of an area based on population and other characteristics. We use that census tract because it was, facilitate for us the idea to figure out some other potential determinants in that area, like a poverty and presence of seniors. So what we did was we relied on that area, and then we start to get more strategic. What you see here is the presence of cooling center in that area. There is a couple of them missing, but we have been trying to be more proactive about identify places with people who live first in an area that might, their housing unit might not have AC, but also who might have some, economical or financial, poverty issues, and also might be in the range of the target population that we have, senior 65. And we hope that also anyone for that area will have a chance to take a break from the heat. Now, once you have the location, you also need, what you will need to go to that location? Well, you will know transportation and to know where to go. And that's how a couple of, friends help us. But before that, let me show you, these are all our friends. Oh, no, I will say all. There are some of our friends that have been helping us. As you can see, we have been trying to partner with different organizations in the community. Something that Travis, highlight, and Chris too was the idea that Polk County Health Departments, we alone can do, we can do something, but to an extent, we need friends, we need collaboration, we need partners in the community. This is an example of the ones that we have been, in previous year, partnered with in the idea that they diffuse the information that we have. Some of them actually are our cooling centers. They open their doors, they offer extended hours so they can be, they can serve the community. One of them, actually, I don't know, I believe I put it here, is the homeless shelters in the community also provide what they call amnesty. So in the times of extreme heat temperatures, they can help us to provide a shelter to a larger population of the community which is in more need. Homeless populations in Polk County are at greater risk when we have extreme temperatures, dangerous temperatures in the community. And this is an example of how our friends have been helping us. The first one is DART. DART is our local transportation agency. DART has been a very good partner by providing free transportation to anyone in the community to and from a cooling center. As I mentioned before, we can be strategic about where to put that locations, but people need transportation to go there. And we don't want to create another limitation, another barriers to them by asking them to pay a bus ticket to be safe. So during the day that we have extreme temperature, you will hear in the news here in Polk County that any resident can take a bus and to go and from and to go and come back from a cooling center for free. The other option is that we know that DART has been allowing residents to stay in the bus, basically, stay in the bus and cool off and then go out. So that's an alternative that we found it very useful. It has been helpful to motivate more people to go to the centers. The other one is for people to know where to go. United Way 211, if you're not familiar with this service, they offer service in Iowa and Nebraska. They have been very, I would say, helpful to spread the news about what cooling centers are open in the community, even during the weekends. We have some centers. In some cases, we use the malls or the public buildings. So at any point, you can call 211 and they will help you to identify a center. And the third one is the Animal Rescue League. As you care as your relative, many people see their pets and their relatives. Even for some of them are even more important. They really are concerned about how they can take care of their dogs, their cats, hamster, whatever. So the Animal Rescue League has been very helpful for residents to, they are actually a cooling center. If today it would be a extreme heat that you had the capability to go to the Animal Rescue League location and you have a dog, you can bring it with you. And they will be, open their doors and they will give you a place where you can take a respite from the heat. These are some of the educational posters and displays that we have. As I say, education is another important part. We have been focused on educate residents about children and pets. And then the other one has been chronic conditions and people who take medicine. Some cases we noticed that they were storing this medicine in their cars, which could affect affect the intensity or the composition of some medicine, which is not very good for people who need this medicine to be safe. And the third one that you see is still cool this summer. It's a poster that describes many practices that could be done. This poster has been translated in many different languages, which is my final remarks is please, when you establish or develop strategies to extreme heat, be concerned about our risk populations, but also be concerned about populations that might be out of the spectrum, with basically refugees, no English speaking, partner with organizations that work with Latino communities and with other communities. We have, for example, here caring for Eco Madres, who is doing a great job. As I said, the health department has been very proactive about doing that. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Juan. I was actually on the bus on DART this summer, commuting home on one of those 100-plus days, and the bus driver stopped to pick up a gentleman who apparently it appeared to me did not have a ticket. And at the time, I didn't know it was a formal partnership. I just thought it was a kind thing to do. So I'm glad to learn that the partnership is formalized. So next we have Lana, who is going to share with us kind of some of the frontline work that they're doing to ensure that children and families in need have access to the resources they need to during extreme weather events.
I should have known this wouldn't work. You can't see me if I'm behind the podium. Good morning. You've heard a lot of information already today. I'm going to give you just a little different perspective on weather and heat as it pertains to individuals and families that are living with a low income here in Iowa. I'll begin by giving you just a 30-second commercial about community action agencies. We have 17 community action agencies, all nonprofits, except one, who are operating in all 99 counties, providing services and programs to individuals and families with a low income. They come to us for lots of different reasons. We had about 308,000 Iowans come last year. Many come for emergency services. That might be a food pantry, a clothes closet, a disconnection notice from their utility company. They could also be coming because they're getting educational services. We do a lot of Head Start and early childhood programming. They may be coming for health services. Many of our agencies do a supplemental food program called WIC. They may also be coming for case management services, more developmental long-term approaches to help families alleviate what is causing them to be in poverty. And we do a weatherization program where we make homes more energy efficient. We also do disaster case management services, both as an emergency cash assistance program as well as case management. Another program we do is called the Low Income Home Energy Assistance Program. And this is a program that helps, it's what our country has determined to be the strategy to help make energy more affordable. We had about 83,000 households who got LIHEAP last year. A large percentage of them are elderly or disabled, or they have a child under the age of 6. And some of them have 2 of those conditions. They may be elderly and disabled. On average, the household gets about $470 a year. That money, 99% of the time, gets paid directly to the utility company. I want to talk about energy burden. I said LIHEAP is a way that we have the strategy that our country is using to make energy affordable. And we're trying to address the issue of an energy burden, which really is the percentage of a household income that is spent on their utilities. And, you know, if a household is spending more than 6%, they are experiencing a high energy burden. And you can see the percentages there. We know that low-income families are paying way more than upper-income families. And if you can imagine, if a family making $100,000 was spending $10,000 on their utilities, that's pretty extreme. But we're seeing households who are doing exactly that. The percentage of their income is generally between 9 and 13%. Well, let's take a snapshot of how Iowans are doing in paying their utility bills. So the graphs that I'm going to show you next come to us from the Iowa Utility Board, which is the entity that governs or monitors the investor-owned utility companies. So the data I'm about to show you is relevant to our 3 investor-owned utility companies here in Iowa. Anybody want to guess how many Iowans are past due on their account right now? Just make a guess. How many? 50%? Well, how about this? 150,000 households approximately in July were past due on their utility bills. That number at the top, that was in January of 2018, and it was 461,727 households who were past due on their utility bills. It's a significant number. Let's look at those who got energy assistance, that LIHEAP payment. And this graph is especially important. So as of right now, in July, we have about 28,000 Iowans who received energy assistance last year who are past due on their accounts. I want you to notice the pattern of this graph. You'll see it goes up and then it drops down, and then it goes up and it drops down. What this is telling us, the down points are generally, trying to look at this correctly, in October. So what they do in the summer months, they're catching up on their utility bills. So the number of households is significantly lower because they use those summer months to get current. As the weather gets colder, you see more and more families falling behind. Now, I'm going to take you back a slide. On this one, that high peak was in January of 18. Now let's look at the energy assistance folks. In January of 18, they're way down here at the bottom because they've caught up over the summer. So the percentage at that time of low-income families was significantly lower than it is in the spring once they've paid their heat bills. Look at how much money we owe. Millions and millions of dollars are owed to our utility companies in past due accounts. Over $7.7 million in July of this year. Oh, I'm sorry. That's energy assistance. So when you look at all households, that's the number of households, energy assistance. This is the amount of money all households owe. So we were looking at, is that right? I got to look at my slide, sorry. Yes. When we look at energy assistance households, it's about $7 million, 7.7. That's a difference of 19.8 million. So 19.8 million are not low income, dollars are owed by not low income households, not households that got energy assistance. So this isn't an issue that just impacts families that are in extreme poverty. To be eligible for LIHEAP, you have to be at or below 175% of the poverty guidelines. This affects a lot of lower middle class individuals too. That's a chunk of change. Well, let's look at disconnects. When we look at disconnections for all households, right now, in January, 63,000, almost 64,000 households are facing a disconnection. In July, in the heat of summer, 64,000 Iowans were facing a disconnection. And for those who got energy assistance, it was right at 10,000 households. So the takeaway from this is really that more than 2/3 of low-income households are facing a very high energy burden. We know that they are making very difficult choices in order to pay their utility bills. Our public health folks talked about taking half of their medicine. They're reducing their thermometer, keeping it hotter in their house in the summer and colder in the winter. They're struggling to stay current. The data shows us that those issues of staying current on their bill patterns year after year are repeated. We invest $3.6 million in LIHEAP. As the temperatures warm, we're going to need to see significant increases in order to meet the needs. And we really have no funding that is for cooling. So we would need to establish some way to be able to help address cooling costs too. We can use some funds to buy room air conditioners, but we could see more significant improvements if we were able to do more weatherization. And I have a little video. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get this to play, but we're going to try. And I'm going to go over my time just a little bit. But I want you to hear from someone who actually was able to benefit from some of the help that we give. But I don't know if I'm going to be able to get it to play. Maybe. I talked about disaster case management, and we're seeing huge increases in the number of families that are devastated by disasters, especially flooding.
It rained like
So we're going to hear from
inches
Steve.
in 5 3/4 hours. And then around 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning, the water came up really fast, just like somebody filled up the bathtub. And then the firemen come down there. I stayed there at the house until the firemen come down there with their boat and picked me up off the front porch because the water was coming in both ends of the house. It was ruined. The basement was completely full. The basement actually filled up and started running out into the bathroom because the water was so high around the house. There actually was a current. They tore it down in October. So yeah, we're just getting it fixed up. Had a new roof put on it a couple months before, and it just ruined it. Down around the house, it was just starting to come in the doors, the front door and the back door, and down where I had my weather shelter, the water's 5 foot deep. Actually, since it was so hot and humid, the mold came into the house really fast. And I was just getting new windows put into place. And within 24 hours, there's mold underneath the floor, carpeting already, and was climbing up the walls. And the place had such a powerful smell, it almost burned your eyes and your nose. When you went in there, you didn't stay in there very long, and you had a painter's mask on. I've lived in Loudon most of my life. I'm 66 years old now. I like the small towns. My brother took me over there. I called her first, and my brother took me over to the office here in Tipton, and then we talked about what we could do, and then she said they could actually assist me with staying in the hotel. And then I had to sign some papers, and then she come back out a couple weeks later. I had to sign some more papers, and then basically they put me up in the hotel for 5 weeks. And by the time I first moved into the hotel, I already I had an eye out for this. And then I knew they were doing the apartment stuff, so I got my name in there, and then I moved in here 5 weeks afterwards. I was in here the first week of August. Actually, after I was flooded out, there was 2 more down there, 2 years, 2014 and 2015. There was almost matched what was down there before, because if the house would have been down there, it would have been surrounded again. Oh, I'd just like to thank you guys, this organization, for helping me out, because monetary wise, it really helped big time, So I don't think I could have done it without you guys. So it's nice to know that there is an organization out there that will help you when disaster strikes and that stuff, because a lot of people never think it's going to happen to them.
You can say it better than anyone about how the severe weather impacted him. He lost his home. And the importance of being able to stay in that community was very near and dear to his heart. And so that bed and breakfast where he stayed lowered their rate to the state rate, which is what we're able to pay when someone has temporary housing for a disaster. And he was able to stay in that community, pretty much the only community he knows. So thank you.
Thank you, Lana, for sharing with us the work that you all do around the state. It's actually a great lead into one of our first questions. We have somebody in the audience who's asked, how is rural Iowa, especially southwestern Iowa, preparing for extreme conditions as compared to the examples that we've seen from the urban and metropolitan centers? Just wondering if there's shared concerns and even collaborations that are going on here.
I can touch on that. We are fully engaged in disaster case management services, primarily in Fremont and Mills County right now. The severity of the disasters there is unlike many that we've seen. We have just received word this week that there is going to be funding from the federal government to pay for the disaster case management services to help individuals and families there. We also had severe devastation in Marshalltown with the tornado last year, and we did case management there as well. It did not get a federal declaration, so all of the money that we had available was either state or local donations. And the benefit of what's happening in Mills, Fremont, Potawatomi, Scott, and there's one more county down south, is that we'll be able to access more federal dollars and not have such a huge impact on the state budget. So that's kind of the case management side of it. I don't know if anybody can talk about the structural side of it.
Sure. I think Travis and Juan, we have another question that complements that and speaks to your work about preparedness and kind of the partnerships that are going on in local communities, and if any of your work is being similar activities happening at the county level outside in outstate Iowa, and whether or not every county has a heat preparedness plan, and if they don't, how can citizens get involved in advocating for one?
Yeah, so I will add to the point on the mitigation or structurally. A lot of this, if you recall with the flooding, goes back to the Corps of Engineers. So it's allocating those dollars through the Corps, working with the Corps on the federal owned levees and whatnot, and even locally, specifically in Johnson County, we're updating our plan there with the Corps to help hopefully reduce flooding both within city limits of Iowa City and the University of Iowa campus. So there are some things going on. It's just kind of that time process. But yeah, so every 99 counties within the state of Iowa all have emergency management representation. Most of those are geographically county-based, single county. We do have some dual counties and even one coordinator that covers 4 counties, smaller counties, but nonetheless a large geographic footprint. We all have emergency support function structures within the state of Iowa. So our ESS, if any of you have worked in an EOC for flooding or otherwise, all those support functions that come to the table. So we are required to have response plans under those ESFs. So ESF 6 is mass care, and that's actually where Salvation Army, Red Cross, those partners come in, a lot of times with the sheltering. That and ESF 8, which is public health and healthcare, medical services. But specifically what we did in Johnson County is we took that a step further and created a heat-specific annex. So other independent agencies, emergency management agencies may have done that as well. I can't speak specifically. And I'm kind of looking to our association president over there, but I would imagine others have taken that ball and ran with it as well. But overarching, there's components, even if they don't have a heat-specific plan, there's components in their ESF all hazards plans that would constitute different things such as sheltering, mass care, and those type of events.
I will add something quickly. It's not just because Travis is right next to me, the director of Polk County EMA is right over there, but I will second that. Actually, something that I didn't explain is that in this year we are shifting our response to extreme heat. We are partnering now with our Polk County EMA to take that role in that case to return more like the response role. They have the expertise, they have the knowledge, and they have the partners that, it will amplify the efforts that we could have in the community to reach our residents to be safe in case of extreme heat. Polk County will continue to provide education and provide some of the messaging and working with meteorologists and educate the community, also identify strategies that could help them to be safe. But in the case of response, in the case, that would be my suggestion to any public health department or any organizations to approach the local EMA and discuss this. Our experience with our local EMA has been great, and as I say, they have the ears and they have the support of many organizations in the community. So they are very good partners. So I will encourage you to do it.
Also, when it comes to disasters, you can become engaged in the long-term recovery committees that are organized in your counties. Some of those are very active, some don't get active until there is a disaster. So being ahead of the disaster is very helpful in having a process and a plan on how your county is going to respond. I know the emergency managers are very involved in long-term recovery committees as well. We work very closely with the emergency managers. Once they declare a disaster or put in a request to the governor's office for a disaster and the governor makes that declaration, then we work with them on the case management piece. And we also are collaborators on the long-term recovery committees.
Thanks. We have a couple of questions here about vulnerable populations in addition to the elderly, children, low income that we've been talking about. One in particular, several of you mentioned the impact on farm workers, on day laborers, on even people in processing plants and such, many of whom we know are in vulnerable employment situations, may or may not be undocumented. One question, wondering how you have seen or what efforts are being made to reach these people who may be in, like I said, otherwise vulnerable situations, and make sure that they are also benefiting from the protections and the interventions that we have in place. And this could also be addressed to Chris and what's going on nationally on that issue.
I will make a quick comment. Something that we have explored. At the end of the day, we represent the government. We are a county agency, but we are a government agency. And some populations might be concerned about, being approached by a government agency. So in this case, we are trying to partner with organizations that have their trust of, people in the community. It will be in the case of undocumented immigrants. We are trying to do that, partner with organizations that they can spread the message to with these communities. At the same time, we have been trying to utilize local media, in Spanish, that they can, spread the message, amplify, and in some cases put it to terms that are more familiar with these communities. In addition, I think a risk population, we talk about outdoor workers, but a population that we actually reach out in the past previous year has been athletes, children in the community, are the ones that are outside practicing sports. And in some cases, we believe everybody loves sports, but in some cases, the concern about how healthy are the conditions for children to be exposed to extreme temperature hasn't been the first priority of some institutions. So we are reaching out to them to please take care in consideration. Everybody wants to win a game, everybody wants to be prepared for the next game, but we want for children to be safe. So in addition, adult workers also has been part of our spectrum to reach to Athletes Association, high schools to be conscious about that.
No.
Sure, great question. I think I can talk just nationally. I mentioned there are no federal uniform regulations on outdoor heat exposure. There are, however, 2 states that do have regulations, those being California and Washington state, in which case they do require rest, shade, water to be provided at all these sites. You have to have bathroom facilities close by so you can continue to hydrate, things like that. And they have partnered with some community-based organizations to develop and co-create materials to outreach to them. So 99 Color is I think if you Google that, will be the one from California. But I would say beyond that, I don't think I'd say it's fair. I'll speak for myself, but I think public health in Florida can do, and other places can do a better job on reaching out to these communities. As a researcher, I think it's a little difficult. I always have to ask if I'm going to, I can point out an issue, but will that get that community in trouble without necessarily causing an immediate benefit to a policy change for them in terms of, so I really, that's sort of, it's hard to get sort of community buy-in for some of those initiatives.
We have a question here. It's not as much about policy directly as we've discussed here. May even come back to Professor Tackle, but wondering what's being done to incorporate green and natural infrastructure, like urban tree canopies, to help mitigate extreme heat. Chris, do you have any?
Sure. It really depends on the area, but cities tend to be the leader on incorporating green infrastructure. Particularly, I think Chicago and New York City are the ones I can think of that are really leading on this effort, turning literally large, very large areas. So from a climatological perspective, you can't just put a green roof on one building to make a pretty big impact on air temperatures. You'd have to have, you know, a half a square mile, a pretty large area, and a coordinated effort to do that. And they're doing that they're also doing that in ways that are pretty innovative, coupling with community organizations to do community gardens. So it's not just green infrastructure, but community addressed, what's called food desert's a bit of a dated term, or but essentially to address multiple community needs and to get their investment in them. There's still a lot that needs to be done. We don't, for example, know if you just painted all your roofs white, if how much that would appreciably alter your local air temperatures. We can model that to some degree. You know, if you go to a place like Phoenix, their pavement is red versus black, since they don't need to melt snow during the winter.
Our last set of questions really tee up nicely for our afternoon panel, talking about policy action that we can take. So we have several people that asked about what type of public policies, either state or local, can be enacted to help put these in place. But also along with that, where are we at budget-wise and appropriations for this type of work, including money that comes to community action organizations like your own, appropriations to county governments, local infrastructure to support the work? Do you want to go first?
So, our budget obviously does not really circle around that or focus around that, but on another plug for the long-term recovery committees and the co-eds, that's where we've had great experiences in Johnson County, where if something hasn't made it up to a governmental or a governor's proclamation or declaration for disaster, or if it was a local isolated event, our co-ed has stepped in and graciously come up with funding, working through United Way and some of our other partners there. So that's one aspect just I want to really point out there locally. If you don't have that large pot of money, if you have an active co-ed or LTR, having them engage, because we've come together to fund repairs from storm damages, mitigation efforts for some residents. So I just wanted to share with that.
Most of our funding comes from the federal government. As I noted, the LIHEAP funds are all federal dollars. The state makes no investment in LIHEAP. The Weatherization Assistance Program, which is a program that reduces energy consumption of families with a low income, received $19 million. That's a combination of Department of Energy, Federal Department of Energy funds. We do a little bit of a transfer from LIHEAP to do some work that the energy efficiency funds don't cover. And then we received money from customers of the investor-owned utility companies of about $6.5 million. There was a policy change on that last year, and so that is being reduced significantly, about 52% for the utility money for the upcoming year. So we did about 1,200 homes. We're going to see a big reduction in that because of the reduced utility funding. So, you know, what could be done? We could look at the state as a source of revenue to help families with a lower limited income, both in terms of supporting LIHEAP and trying to restore some of the funding that was cut due to the bill on the utility and investor-owned utility customer payments.
As we like a quick comment, I don't have the numbers of the expertise, but my hope is that, you know, in that case, policymakers will provide the same level of concern about providing LEAP heat for, you know, LEAP funds for, as we provide for winter, we also provide for summer times. It's affecting many residents. We have experienced firsthand in Polk County the limitations that the LEAP funding for heat have. So I hope, as a health department, we hope that policymakers, decision makers, we also put in consideration these symptoms and how actually our, you know, as Professor explained at the beginning, our planet is changing and the weather is changing and it's getting hotter and hotter every summer. Thank you.
Well, Thank you, and we do have many policy makers in the audience today, and they'll be up here on stage this afternoon. So hopefully some of these issues can be discussed now and in future in the session as well. I want to ask you to join me again in thanking our panelists today for sharing their wisdom.